I started having a weird recurring dream about 6 months ago. At first, I didn't pay much attention to it and thought it kept happening because I was thinking about it too much. But as the weeks went by and the dream kept coming back, it was always exactly the same, and I started paying closer attention to the details. In the dream, I'm 3 years old and I don't have any awareness of my adult self. I'm just a kid riding this little tricycle in front of our house, and it's a normal, warm summer afternoon. This is all taking place at the house we lived in until I was in middle school, before my parents moved to a house on the other side of town, which they still live in today. Whenever I wake up from the dream, I wonder why I keep dreaming about that house, because I feel like I have so many more memories in their current house from being older and going through high school and college while living there. As I'm riding my tricycle in circles in the driveway, I can see that my mom is nearby and had been working in the small flower bed that was to the right of our front door. She's kneeling down in front of the flowers with gardening tools in one of her hands and the hose in her other hand, rinsing the dirt off of the tools. Then suddenly, I can hear my mom scream. It's not a startled scream, it's like a full-blown fear scream. I stop pedaling and look up at her, and she's just standing there in the yard, frozen in place with her arms stiff and to her sides in front of the flower bed and staring straight up at the sky. I can almost see the veins in her neck like she's straining or flexing her body against her will, and her hands are empty because she dropped the gardening tools and the hose. I can see the hose lying on the ground still running, with water starting to pool in the dirt, making mud around the flowers. I don't remember seeing what she was looking at, I only remember watching her face as it shifted from fear to complete panic. Then I can see her turn and run into the house. She doesn't look at me at all during this, and doesn't call my name or really even remember I'm there. She just bolts straight into the front door, disappearing inside without even closing it. And that's when I notice I'm starting to lift off the ground. I don't really understand what's happening, but I feel weightless. I can actually see my feet lifting off the pedals, and I can see the shadow of my little body rising higher and higher above the driveway. It's all incredibly detailed in a disturbing way, and I can even feel wind against my skin, and I can hear all the normal neighborhood sounds fading away. I look down at my house again, and I see my mom burst back out of the front door. She is still screaming, and it looks like she's looking for me. I watch her run out into the yard with her hands on her head, looking straight up at me, and I can see her mouth moving, but I can't hear any words or sounds at this point. I just keep going up higher in the air, watching the house get smaller beneath me. The last vision I have of her is seeing her fall down onto the grass, which really startles me because she looks unconscious and limp, and it's scary. Then, all of a sudden, I'm somewhere else. The shift is instant. One moment I'm ascending above our house, the next I'm in a room that looks like it was designed for a child. It's like a room you'd see in a preschool or something, and I don't recognize anything. The lighting is soft and warm, but I don't see any lights or lamps actually turned on. There are toys and boxes of things around, but nothing looks quite right. The whole room looks like someone tried to recreate a preschool but didn't get all the details right. It's almost like a movie set because it has an overall feeling of fakeness. I don't feel scared being in the room, and there's even a slight feeling of it being familiar for some reason. If anything, I feel calm and somewhat curious about some of the toys lying around. At this point in the dream, I realize there are people in the room with me. At least they seem like people, but again, there's just something off about them in the same fake way. The way they stand and the way they move is weird, but only slightly. Their faces look almost right, but not quite. I might sound crazy saying this, but picture some other species or future AI robot trying to look like us and mimic us, but they miss the fine details and little mannerisms that make someone truly look real. That's what it was like. One of the people in the room, a younger woman, kneels down in front of me and tells me right away that everything is okay. She's very close to me and seems to be examining my face while at the same time telling me I'm safe and that they are just checking in. She tells me I look very healthy and that everything looks perfect. I can hear the other people in the room talking in soft voices, which are honestly comforting, but there's still something unsettling about the way they speak. It all seems very rehearsed. As soon as the woman in front of me stands up, the dream ends and I wake up. I don't wake up quickly like a nightmare or breathing heavily or sweating. I just wake up and lay there thinking about it. It's always the same dream and always that exact same sequence of events. I was having the dream about once a week for a while, but it has since tapered off and only happens occasionally now. I never mentioned it to anyone, or at least not at first, because it just felt like a weird dream and nothing more. Then one evening, I was on the phone with my mom. She had called just to catch up and we were talking about completely normal things. But after about an hour, just before we were about to say goodbye, I decided to mention the dream to her. I told her that I had been having this weird recurring dream and spent several minutes describing all of the details to her. I really didn't expect much of a reaction, but when I finished telling her the story, she went silent. After like 10 seconds, I actually said "Mom" because it sounded like the call dropped. She said sorry and then told me it was really weird I had a dream like that because she did remember a day when I was about 3 years old when something happened to her. She told me she had been working in the flower bed one summer when I was very young and had been using the hose to rinse off some gardening tools. She remembered looking at me while I was riding my tricycle in the driveway, then she completely blacked out. She said she woke up several minutes later, lying in the front yard and soaking wet because the hose was still on, and it had created a large puddle in the grass around her and all the way down the driveway. She had no memory of anything happening though. She had always thought it was heat stroke from working outside in the middle of summer, and that's what made her pass out. She had been working outside for at least an hour and it just made sense. The only part about it that even scared her was that I was left unattended while she was passed out in the yard. But other than that, she had never thought much of it. It was just a strange little event from years ago until I told her about my dream. She asked me to describe it in detail one more time, and I could actually hear the change in her voice as I was telling her the story again. She said it gave her chills hearing the whole thing a second time, and the more we talked about it, the more unsettled she sounded. By the time we ended the call, we were both thoroughly freaked out, and neither one of us could explain it. Since then, I've never been able to look at that dream the same way, and I still occasionally have it. To my mom and me, it's not just a dream anymore, it's a memory, or at least some version of one. And if it really is a memory of something, then what actually happened to me that day? I had just turned 16 when this happened. My cousin Lauren was the same age as me, just a couple of months older, and we would always spend a few weekends together during summer break at her family's cabin on Lake Vermilion in Minnesota. Her mom, my Aunt Lisa, owned the cabin and rented it out most of the year, but we were able to use it a few times every summer. It was a smaller, 2-story cabin that was above the lake in the trees with a trail that led down to the water. It wasn't completely isolated though. There were other houses and cabins scattered along the lake, but you couldn't see them through the trees, and when you were down at the water, it felt like you were alone. One of the nights we were there, my aunt had driven into town to pick up some snacks and a movie for us. It wasn't that far, maybe 20 minutes each way, but the drive was on back roads, so we knew she'd be gone a little while. Lauren and I went down to the lake and were sitting in the dark with our feet in the water when it started raining. It was still warm out, even with the wind picking up, and we didn't mind getting wet, so we stayed. We were just hanging out and talking about random drama with one of her friends when the first real flash of lightning lit up the sky. The thunder cracked right afterward and kind of startled both of us. I remember laughing about it because we loved storms, but we knew we'd probably need to head back to the cabin soon. A few more flashes came after that lit up the water, so we decided to head back. Neither of us wanted to be the first one to say it, but standing on a beach next to trees and a giant body of water during a thunderstorm probably wasn't the best idea. So we got up and started making our way back up the trail. That's when we saw the weirdest lightning bolt I've ever seen in my life. This bizarre bolt of lightning came down perfectly straight like a single white column of light directly above where the cabin was, though we couldn't actually see the cabin because it was over the small hill. The lightning didn't branch out like a normal bolt, it just dropped straight down and then stayed there, visible for what felt like way too long. It had to be there 3 full seconds if I had to guess. Normally, lightning disappears in an instant or flashes a few times, but this one was solid the whole time and stayed in the exact same place like a spotlight. The other weird thing about it was that there wasn't any thunder afterward, just the sound of rain starting to absolutely pour down. Seeing the bolt stopped us dead in our tracks because it was so odd looking and so close to us. It really looked like it could have struck the cabin. We were standing there staring up the hill, and I was getting worried about being out there and getting struck. Neither one of us said anything for a second, then we both had the same thought at the same time. We needed to get back to the cabin as fast as we could. We started running up the trail, and the rain was coming down so hard at this point that it hurt my face. It was completely dark out except for the flashes of lightning, and by the time we made it to the walkway that went from the trail to the cabin, another big flash lit up the forest, and I saw the most unexpected and terrifying thing I've ever seen. I know this sounds like something out of a movie, but standing on the roof of our cabin was the silhouette of something tall and thin like a person, but a very weird version of one. It was only for a split second while the forest was lit up by the lightning, but I could see it clearly turning its body and moving in the rain. I couldn't see any details other than the shape of it against the bright flash, but it was standing up on two legs. It had two long, disturbingly thin arms, and it looked like it was faced directly toward us. I mean it when I say this literally took my breath away. I actually gasped out loud because it was so shocking to see. My chest locked up and I tried to yell to my cousin, but I physically couldn't speak. And then the flash was over and the darkness came back, and all I could see were the lights on in the cabin. This is the point where I've never run so fast in my entire life to make it to the door. As soon as we got inside, I asked Lauren if she'd seen that on the roof. She asked me what I was talking about while getting the wet hair off of her face. I told her when the lightning flashed, there was something on the roof that looked like a person or a figure staring at us just seconds before we ran into the house. She looked at me like I was joking and told me she didn't see anything since she had her head down the whole way up the path to keep the rain out of her face. Before I could say anything else to her, we heard a loud noise that sounded like it was coming from upstairs. It was a scraping noise like something heavy was being moved across the floor. Then another one that sounded like a creaking. Then a series of thumps that I swear to God sounded like someone was actually running across the roof. Lauren looked me directly in the eyes and said, "What in the hell was that?" I think we both knew that whatever I saw was real and there was actually something on the roof. Both of us stood there frozen for what felt like forever because we didn't want to go upstairs and we didn't know what to do, and every few seconds we would hear the thumping on the roof again. Lauren even asked me if it could be a black bear that got up there because it was that loud, but I told her again that what I saw was thin and tall and there was no way it could be a bear. Out of nowhere, a bright light started coming through the window on one side of the cabin. This completely freaked Lauren out and she screamed when she saw it. I grabbed onto her just as scared and confused about what was going on as she was. Then, while literally shaking and staring at the window, we realized that her mom was home and the lights we were seeing were the headlights from her car pulling into the driveway. Both of us ran to the door as soon as she walked inside. She immediately asked us what was wrong, and we both started talking at the same time, telling her what I saw on the roof and the weird shaft of lightning and the noises we heard that made us sure there was something walking around on the roof. She frowned but didn't look concerned and told us it was just the storm and the sounds that the cabin makes when the high winds come through the trees. I so badly wanted to argue with her, especially about the figure I saw on the roof, but I could tell she wasn't buying any of it and wasn't worried in the least. She seemed so calm that it almost made me second-guess myself. Was she right and I was seeing things that weren't there because of the storm? The more I thought about it, the more I was sure I wasn't seeing things. I know I saw a definite figure of someone or something standing on the roof, and there's not a single thing I could think of that would look like that. The noises on the roof stopped as soon as my aunt showed up, and the heavy part of the storm passed over us after about 20 minutes. It took us a good hour to calm down, even though I barely slept that night thinking about something being on the roof. We did end up watching the movie that night, but we didn't catch much of it because we were still talking about everything and fell asleep with the TV on. We never had anything else happen on that trip, but it scared me pretty badly. Since it happened, I don't like going up to the cabin like I used to. My aunt still owns it and still stays there every summer, but I only go about once a year now. I just can't relax and have fun there anymore because it's always in the back of my mind. The image I have burned into my memory of that thing on the roof was so weird and not human, and I will never, ever forget it. My wife and I were driving back from a trip we took to Trinidad, Colorado, heading home to Dallas, Texas. Back when this happened, I used to have to make these long 9-hour drives anytime I wanted to pick up weed since I was new to Texas and didn't know anybody yet. It was well past midnight and the snow was coming down pretty heavily where we were. The roads were starting to get slick and we had just barely crossed into New Mexico when I saw something that made my stomach drop. When I first saw it, I thought it was a helicopter because I could see a big searchlight cutting through the trees, sweeping back and forth like it was looking for someone. That was weird enough given how remote it was where we were, but then I noticed there were multiple searchlights and they looked like they were coming down or landing and were just above the treetops. My eyes were trying to adjust to it and I was trying to piece together what I was looking at when it suddenly came into focus. This wasn't a helicopter. This thing, whatever it was the biggest aircraft I had ever seen in my life. It was just floating above the trees, absolutely massive, and I don't mean just big, I mean incomprehensibly huge, to the point that it sent this deep primal terror through me. I don't know what it is about gigantic machines, but they mess with my head in an almost phobic way. It's the same way I feel when I see a huge cruise ship or a 4-engine commercial jet up close. There's something about the sheer scale of things that size that triggers something in my brain. The full shape of it slowly came into view and it looked like a giant boomerang. It had 5 enormous convex lights on the underside and they were huge, easily the size of a car or even bigger. There was one in the dead center at the tip of it, one in the middle of each wing, and then one at each of the farthest points of the wings. They were on and glowing, but not with the kind of light you'd expect from a plane or a helicopter. They weren't casting harsh beams down through the trees. It was more like the light was just there, illuminating everything in this eerie, unnatural way. I could feel my heart pounding at such a fast rate, and I was grabbing the steering wheel so hard my knuckles hurt. I kept looking back and forth between the road and this thing, trying to understand what was happening while also not wrecking the car. I woke up my wife because she'd been sleeping in the passenger seat and told her to grab her phone right now and start taking a video as fast as possible. I remember her jumping because I said it so loud, then looking over at me while I was pointing and repeating myself and saying, "Film it, film it." She sat up and looked out her window and the front window, then turned around to look out the back and said, "Film what?" I nearly drove off the road because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I was seeing the biggest aircraft I've ever seen, bigger than anything I knew was even in existence, hovering right in front of us, and she couldn't see it? She was looking around everywhere and then back at me, and I could tell she was getting anxious because she said I was scaring her. I was seriously almost having a meltdown. There was this huge, unmistakable thing completely dominating the sky, and somehow she couldn't see it. I finally found a spot to pull over and we argued about it right there on the side of the road. We were in the same car, looking in the same direction at the same exact time. How could I possibly be seeing something like this and she couldn't see a damn thing? That moment felt like time was stretched out, or like I was stuck in some weird, twisted reality where my senses weren't matching up with the rest of the world. It was so absurd and so impossible, and for a second I started doubting my own sanity, asking myself if I was hallucinating or losing my mind. But no, this was real. It was as real as the seat I was sitting in and the road in front of me. Then, after what felt like forever, but was probably only seconds, it started to move away from the road. It went slowly at first and was completely silent. There wasn't even a rush of displaced air as it went past the trees and around a hill where I couldn't see it anymore. The second it was out of sight, I felt this weird heaviness in my stomach, almost like I had just lost something important. I kept looking out the windows and checking my mirrors to see if it would come back, but it was just darkness. I had totally forgotten I was even with anyone, but I looked over to see my wife right in front of me, looking at me like I had gone completely insane. She looked like she was waiting for me to snap out of whatever manic episode I was apparently having. After sitting there, more confused than I think I've ever been, we got back on the road and started driving again. While we were driving, I told her every detail about what I had seen and what had happened, but she mostly didn't even know how to respond to what I was saying. I have to say the rest of the drive was a little uncomfortable, and my wife ended up going back to sleep. To this day, we have completely different versions of what happened that night. I saw the craziest thing I have ever seen in my life, something that, as far as I know, shouldn't even exist, and she saw nothing. Not lights or an aircraft, and not so much as a weird shadow. Knowing that actually keeps me up at night. It's not just that I saw something impossible, it's that I saw it and she didn't. I reported the whole thing on a UFO and UAP sighting website about a month later, but I didn't hear anything from anyone, and I honestly felt like nobody really cared. I don't know what I expected after posting my story. I think I was hoping someone else might comment or say that they saw the same thing around that same general area. Now that some time has gone by and I've replayed it in my head a million times, I know for sure that I wasn't seeing things. You don't just hallucinate something like that completely out of the blue and only for 5 minutes and then just go back to normal. That's not a thing. I have no idea why my wife couldn't see it, but I'm positive it was real. Believe me or don't believe me, but something incredible was in the sky that night, and I cannot believe I got to see it.